Can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Welcome. Welcome to the Home. For those of you who have not been to the Home before, we're a platform for internet cultures, and we put on events like the one we're here tonight at. And we also do research and publish dossiers around topics related to internet and digital culture. Also, a big hello to our online audience. Some of you can see them over here in the chat. You can see what they're up to and what they're chatting about. So my name is Margarita Osipian, and I put the Home on together with Lillian Stolk, who's, oh yeah, she's sitting there behind you. She's moderating the chat tonight and bringing the questions from the audience into our physical space that we're at here. Marco Vessels, who is hidden behind the curtain, running the live stream together with the team here at the Podcast is Viker. Chef Van Beers, who met you at the front, giving out our wonderful sticker for the night. Eva van Bokstel, who's there documenting, and Guus Hoberecht, who's online with us because she moved to Finland, but she's still able to join us. So, since the start of the pandemic, we've been doing either fully online events or hybrid events in order to bring on-site and online audiences together and create more access to our programming. The past years of doing hybrid events has also led us into a new research trajectory into hybrid experiences, which we are collaborating on together with Affect Lab and Moo Hybrid Art Space. This is a project called the Toolkit for the In-Between. And if you're interested in it and interested in some of our hybrid experiments, then you can scan this QR code and get taken to our website. And actually, one of our speakers tonight, Babu Sineoni, was also a big part of our last experiment during Dutch Design Week, where we created a kind of metaverse-like environment and danced together with avatars that we made. So, as I mentioned, in addition to those of you who are here with us in this physical space, nice little music. We also have people who are joining online on our Livestream website. This is a website that we built ourselves to make it privacy secure and easily accessible. You can see what's happening there on the chat. And in the last year, following an event that we did on a lighter internet and looking at the ecological impact of digital infrastructures, we also added a few different view modes to our Livestream site. So there's like text only, audio only, low res, which is like thumbnails that change every 15 seconds, and then high res, which is what most of us are used to. But we want to offer different ways for people who are joining online to view our website, depending on how much internet access they have, how much data they have. So that's something that we've been experimenting with. So those of you who are online, you can also play around with some of those different view modes as you're watching the stream and see how those are functioning. And just a little extra note is that we actually recently launched our archive site, which is live.thehome.nl, and so you can watch back previous live streams. You can also, if you love tonight's event, you can also go back and watch back tonight's event. And just a big thank you to Tony Brell, who did the design, and Carl Mubarak, who did all the development of the site. We're really happy with it. So one part of thinking about how to create hybrid structures is also thinking about how we can link physical spaces and digital spaces together, whether someone is joining an event online or on site. And this was actually one of our inspirations for Humosphere, which is a scent that we created together in collaboration with Cesar Majorana, and also with the feedback and support of our Hum community. And the Humosphere tries to capture the smell of what we see as our internet. So those of you joining online, maybe you already have your scent, so you can spray it in the space, or you can buy a bottle and recreate the scent of the Hum next time. And for those of you here, I'm actually going to give you a little smell of it, and I'm going to spray it around. But I'm going to grab it from Chef, so give me 1 second. Okay. And raise your hand if you're sensitive to smells, and I won't spray it near you. I'm just gonna spray it near you and not on you. What do you think? Does it remind you of any internet smells? What does it smell like? An unwashed computer, for those of you who are online. That's a really great, actually one of the things that we learned making the smell is the kinds of metaphors that people use. We had like, old yellowing mouse. That's also what someone said. Unwashed computer is really great. Also this kind of iron smell, that this kind of metallic smell, which is actually like a kind of ozone smell. So this was our sort of interpretation of how we imagined the internet to smell. And then we wanted to kind of link people online to people who are in this space. Ooh, okay. If you love it, you can buy a bottle during the break. For those of you who have been following the Home for a while, we usually do two different kinds of events. We do fast events, and we usually have around like between 5 and 8 speakers who do really fast 5-minute talks. And then we have these focus events where we take a much deeper dive into a specific topic. We do research around it. We publish dossiers around it. And then we have these kinds of longer events where we really try to engage in discussion around a topic. And tonight we're focusing on a topic that I think is kind of like on a lot of people's minds, especially those who are in like the tech and cultural sectors. And it's this word that's sort of like I think like in the cultural imagination, which is the metaverse. The metaverse is really having like a kind of cultural moment. Back in 2021, there was a video published that I think Chef sent to me, which was Paris Hilton talking about NFTs and the metaverse and her excitement about the metaverse. And then I was like, what is the metaverse? So I started Googling it. And actually, for me, that was like my first time even hearing this term. And already Paris Hilton was talking about it. So already it was really infiltrating into our kind of cultural space. Both Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg and Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella think that the successor to the mobile internet will be the metaverse. But while the concept of the metaverse dates back to the early 90s, the term gained a lot of traction and growth during the pandemic, where many of us were really online. It's most often used to describe the concept of a future iteration of the internet that is made up of persistent, shared 3D virtual spaces that are linked into a perceived virtual universe. But the metaverse is still only really a concept. While many game environments that some of us know, say Minecraft, Fortnite, Roblox, kind of resemble what we think a metaverse could be, none of them are these kind of persistent spaces. And a persistent space means that it's always present, never resets, pauses, or ends. But the fact that the metaverse is not here yet and still coming into being makes it a space that is open for many possibilities, but also makes it a space that's open for being captured and branded by big tech. Something that, of course, we saw with Facebook changing their name to Meta. With over 13 billion being poured into VR development by Meta, there were a lot of jokes circulating about the legless torsos that populated Meta's low-quality universe in the metaverse, which is called Horizon Worlds. In our current state of tech, it may be the case that the metaverse will work better for more people if it looks worse, but there's also a strategic angle here that we have to take into account. Meta wants to pull users into the platform as soon as possible, and it seems that their ambition for VR is, as Siva Vadhanyan writes, to monitor, monetize, and manage everything about our lives. The definitions of what the metaverse is are always shifting, from the move to understanding a game like Roblox as a metaverse, as opposed to the metaverse, to understanding like a multiplicity of places, so metaverses, to multiverses, and even a hybrid verse. So there's lots of kind of glossary of terms coming up. Understanding the metaverse not as a single piece of hardware or a game or an online experience, but as a set of protocols, technologies, and access devices opens up a lot of space for people who argue that it's going to be AR and not VR that's going to inherit the earth. There's some people who say that we're going to have like a virtual metaverse, so that's in virtual environments where we wear VR headsets, and there will also be an augmented metaverse, which merges real and virtual worlds into a single immersive and unified reality. But while the internet, as we know today, came out of public research in universities and US government programs, the metaverse will most likely be developed by commercial platforms and companies. So it's really crucial that we think carefully about the kind of world or the kind of worlds that we want to bring into being. Are they going to be open, privacy secure, and decentralized? Or will this kind of metaverse platform just become another more embedded way for companies to extract our data and sell it back to us in the form of advertising? With the metaverse slated to span social presence, labor, and entertainment, it's no surprise that it'll open up similar questions around governance, privacy, ownership, and ethics that we're also grappling with today in this kind of 2D, not 3D social media environments that we're in. When the journalist Kashmir Hill spent 24 hours in the metaverse as an animated, floating, legless version of herself, she noted that the metaverse is also a new frontier for trolling. I don't know if some of you might remember that back in December of last year, there was a woman that was sexually harassed and groped in Horizon Worlds. So is the metaverse, as Dr. Courtney Cogburn asks, doomed to perpetuate real-world racial and social inequalities? Or can it open up possibilities to be a more equitable place? So those are a lot of questions, and I hope that we can engage with them tonight and have a discussion together. So I'm really excited to have our three speakers with us, Marina Otero-Verzier, Babusi Nioni, and Wouter Nieuwenhuizen. Just to give like a little sense of how things will go, each speaker is going to give a 10-minute presentation. Then we're going to have a 5-minute short Q&A about that specific presentation. And then after all the speakers have presented, we're going to do a 10-minute break, and then we're going to move into the discussion part of the evening. We changed the format a bit for tonight to have a much longer kind of discussion and dialogue, because we also really want to engage with those of you who are here, those of you who are online, and really dig into some of these questions that we have about the metaverse. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker for tonight, who's Marina Otero-Verzier. So at a moment with unprecedented demands for data storage and digital infrastructure, what does it actually mean to want to build a metaverse? This is one of the central questions that Marina, who's an architect and head of the Social Design Masters at Design Academy Eindhoven, is asking. She's joining us tonight to talk about her latest research project, Future Storage Architectures to Host the Metaverse. Welcome, Marina.
Yeah, thank you. I was complaining that I was not wearing my high heels today. Yeah, good night, everyone, and thank you, Margarita and the team, for the invitation. Actually, many of the questions that perhaps I will bring today are coming from a conversation that we had recently for an interview, and also thank you for that. It was wonderful to have the opportunity to think loud with you. So as Margarita was saying, my interest is not precisely on the space of the metaverse, although I'm also curious about it. But when I'm asked, what is the metaverse for you? I always respond, I'm interested in how it is hosted, where it is hosted, how it is stored, how it is powered, who maintains it. All these questions that generally are not at the core of the conversations that we are having about the metaverse. So it's not so much about the avatars, but it's about how the avatars are stored. And the reason why I'm interested in those questions is because we have seen how data storage has been a very contentious aspect recently, not only in the Netherlands, where we have seen that companies like Meta had been pushed away from certain villages and towns in the Netherlands where they had plans to build a hyperscale data center. But the same situation in which communities have been against data centers has happened in many different places around the world, in Ireland, in Singapore, in Santiago de Chile. And the reason is because these huge infrastructures are consuming a lot of energy, especially in a moment of energy crisis. This is very problematic when we are asking people to be, a bit restrain their energy consumption. We have these infrastructures that are consuming lots of energy, also water. They are emitting a lot of CO2. And yeah, they are not bringing so many jobs as well. So this kind of narrative of infrastructures that are pumping the economy, that's not necessarily correct. So on the one hand, we have these infrastructures that are sucking energy, water, and polluting. They are not contributing that much to local communities, and they are at the same time located in places like the Netherlands that are well connected to fiber optic cables, and they have good tax regimes, like favorable tax regimes. So this is very interesting. If we do, I mean, these places, these infrastructures are already quite stretched. So they are reaching their limits. If we see graphics about data consumption and availability of data storage, we can also see that in the next years, according to the industry and the different data that they have, there will be an area of potential insufficiency, meaning that at some point there will be not enough data centers to store all the data that we are producing all the time. So my question is then, how then we are able to do the metaverse? The metaverse that we imagine is this endless, continuous space where we interact is also created by big amounts of data that has to be processed, has to be created, has to be circulated. And that means more data centers. So recently I had the luck to be awarded a prize by Harvard University that is called Future Storage, and looks precisely at those questions. How we are going to store the metaverse, and how we are going to store data in any case, with the metaverse or without. And what I'm doing is traveling to different places and finding different models for data centers or data storage. In some cases are connected to different forms of energy, like how data storage could be powered by sustainable green energy. In some cases, we look critically into that question because many solar farms or wind farms are located in places where indigenous communities are living, and these infrastructures are really disrupting their life and their livelihood. In some cases, I'm interested in developments in the industry. For instance, underwater data centers. China is implementing them in their 5-year plans. Or, as in the case of Singapore, floating data centers. So there is a wide range of possibilities, including, for instance, forms of storage that are different. So we are generally thinking about a server, but the industry is looking into other possibilities, such as DNA data storage, meaning using the DNA as a space where to store information. And that obviously makes our imagination totally fly. So if we inevitably think about changing the medium of storage, the architecture also changes, and perhaps also what we imagine the metaverse will be on our different lives, our relation to data. What's for me is also important is when we think about these digital infrastructures and our relation to data, we are also able to have a conversation that involves heritage. Generally, this is not coming together so often, but the same that we have conversations about sustainability in the way we use water or other resources, why we think that data is unlimited, that is an unlimited resource. And that's precisely what the metaverse is selling, is saying there is this endless world that runs continuously, regardless if we are in or out, that has unlimited possibilities and that we can use as we want. Well, that has obviously consequences, but also is an idea of, in the moment where we are learning that progress came at a cost, that we cannot grow continuously, that unlimited growth is not a possibility, then suddenly we create this other space where these ideas, these notions are still possible. So I think it's a form of escapism, and it's a form also of making a fool of ourselves, trying to continue inhabiting this idea of limitless. In fact, there is not unlimited way of storing data, as I was trying to explain before. And I think at some point society has to have a conversation together, as we are having today, about what we want as a society to keep. We are hoarding data. We are accumulating data every day. as individuals, as society, but also industries, corporations, states, because data is capital, is something that is valuable, that we store, because at some point it could be leveraged and it could have a value. We don't know yet, but it creates data sets. So those data sets in the future could be, you know, something that could sell very well. But at the same time, we know that, you know, this is creating so much disruption. And by creating parallel worlds, we are putting at risk the only world that we all inhabit or try to inhabit. So how to go about that? My suggestion will be having a conversation between, for instance, different sectors of society, but in particular also about people working in heritage and archiving, digital preservation, thinking about when do we have to let data go, how to think about decay in data, how to think about forms in which data is not a resource that is unlimited, but also that is there to stay forever. And now to the metaverse. So I haven't said what I think is the metaverse, and I want to leave that open. I want you to imagine what it is. I didn't bring any image precisely because what for me is more important is that you imagine what it is for you. And as I said, it could be a place of escapism where we go to still dream about the idea of progress, unlimited resources, unlimited space. Which are the limits of the metaverse? That's a conversation sometimes I have with game designers. What is the limit of virtual space? We can still think about this idea of like no borders. But there are borders. And yes, it is a form of escapism. Still, for me, it's a place that I'm curious about. It's a place where we can rehearse and become other. We can rehearse different forms of being in the world and how to, you know, relate differently. And that comes to the question that we also have other spaces like that in traditional culture. For instance, the carnival. And if we think about the tradition of the carnival, for instance, in medieval Europe, and especially in Catholic countries, but also in other places around the world, this moment of the carnival where, well, ideal roles and identities, rules of the daily life were subverted. In a way, that's the cell of the metaverse, a place where we can be another. We can have different rules of engagement. We can test ways of living and forms of being. I think that has a power because those spaces are needed to rehearse other ways of being in the world, other ideas of, you know, relating between us and the planet. But how to do that in a way that is not at the expense of the planet itself? So whereas I think this idea of like radical embodiments, where it is in an avatar, in a cat, in a more than human, this idea of agglomeration of beings and coalescing of different identities is interesting. My point will be like, let's try to create a metaverse that perhaps is not depending on lithium mines, in exploitation of indigenous communities, of struggling with local communities on questions of water and energy, and having ever-growing data centers. Thank you.
Do you want this water? Is this good?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's always, it's always wonderful to hear about this research. Also because I said this to you when we did the interview together, but it's so important to not just think about what the metaverse will look like, but actually how is it going to be built? Like what, and I think you said it really well, like, I think this was also when we had our interview, but how will our world that we share together change if we actually build this metaverse? And I think that link is really important. I did have a question. I was thinking about, because you have this lecture series, the, what is it, School of the City? And the first lecture that you gave a few weeks ago, there was a statistic that 90% of today's data was made, 90% of all the data in the world was made in the last 2 years. And it was interesting to hear you talk about how we can try to move forward, but what do we do with all of this accumulated data that we already have as well. I wonder if you had any strategies for that.
The images that we don't even look, and they are stored in our computers or disks or like phones, and they are consuming energy still. They are emitting CO2. So it's just like, just to make it clear. So the fact that we just store them for perhaps in the future is actually curtailing the possibility of that very future. So I think there's a question about futurity that we have to be very much aware. So when I see, for instance, I go to Venice and I see everyone taking selfies and pictures, I get like stomach pain, because I just imagine like the amount of information and infrastructure that is needed to just host all that information. I'm not trying to put the blame on individuals, because actually the hoarders of data are other industries, like, and sometimes for interesting reasons, advancements in health, for instance, they need a lot of like big data sets, or in questions about planning, etc. But in a way, we have to take decisions as a society how much we can keep. And we do it in other realms like museums and archives. So we are used to have these conversations also in our houses, how much we can keep. Well, the data is the same.
Yeah. Actually, my email program that I have called Hey, it automatically deletes anything that's more than 2 years old.
Yeah. I think there are strategies for that, like maybe, we have to have a conversation. But for me, will be a form of data literacy that is also a conversation as we have about in the city, which buildings have to stay, which ones could we change. So we have this conversation with many other, realms. And I think in data is a form of also understanding the consequences that until now, for us, it was just like endless. We can just take as many pictures as possible. When we had the analog cameras, at least we have to know if we can develop them, because it will have a cost. But with digital, it also has a cost.
Are there any questions in the audience? Yes, Chef, behind you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you mentioned is, of course, at the moment, everything is being stored in the cloud. I come at a time, I remember, that things were stored on local optical drives. Yeah. Maybe we need to go back to see the possibility to store things on local storage mediums, like high-density optical drives. That will solve, I think, a lot of these problems. And maybe second thing is, you mentioned that these huge data centers can be a problem. It is a problem at the moment, but I see also that technology develops. So maybe in the future, you have very new technologies that can have high compression rates of the data, where then you don't need so much data storage for the same data that you need to now maybe have 4 data centers. They can put it into one data center.
Yeah.
So I think the problem is not that huge as you mentioned.
Oh, but the problem is that we always put the emphasis or the hopes in yet a new technology that will come to solve the problem. And we have seen that in many other realms of life. And the reality, unfortunately, is that perhaps that technology comes too late. And obviously, data is not the only problem we have, but it's one of them. And for me, the most important is the mentality, to think, yeah, we can keep on doing what we do, and there will be perhaps a technological development that will, make our life continue as it is without having to care. I don't necessarily agree with that mentality, but I agree with you that there are indeed technological developments that will make easier to compress data. For instance, what I was mentioning about DNA, or form of laser, and many others. Quantum computing probably will also allow to have that. But again, isn't it the problem that we always think, okay, we can keep on consuming the same, and then we have green energy. But green energy is not, it's better perhaps than fossil fuel, but it still needs to have huge mines for extracting lithium. It still needs metals and other elements to be constructing the different devices, where they are solar panels. So it's always comes at a cost. So at some point, there is something that we have to question about our lifestyle.
Thank you. This was a short 5-minute one, so we can continue some of these questions. I also saw there was maybe something coming up in the chat, but we'll continue the conversation. Thank you so much. Do you want to take your water?
Oh, thank you.
So as I mentioned in my introduction, what the metaverse is and can become is something that's being co-opted by big tech. But what could a more accessible and decentralized metaverse actually look like? So our next speaker is Babusi Nyoni, who I also mentioned in my introduction. Babusi is a self-taught Zimbabwean innovator and tech entrepreneur who's focused on building tools for future Africa. He's going to be joining us to talk about his latest experiment, which is about building a decentralized version of a metaverse in order to establish a framework for future truly African virtual worlds. For Babusi, the metaverse should be open and accessible to everyone, not just users who can afford the expensive hardware required to engage in VR experiences. Welcome, Babusi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Margarita, for the introduction. I am Babusi Nyoni, and I'm excited to present to you my latest experiment, the African Metaverse Framework. And this, for me, came about through my practice, where I typically work at the intersection of emerging technology and the needs of underrepresented communities. And I've typically worked using artificial intelligence or machine learning technologies, specifically in computer vision. And most recently, I started asking myself about the metaverse. And my question was, how do we build an alternative and inclusive metaverse? But I guess a more important question is why, right? Like, why does the metaverse need to be decentralized? Margarita touched a lot on the concept of the metaverse, as well as, you know, what currently is the state of play, in the sense that a lot of big tech players are pushing the conversation. And this is leading a lot of the public to assume that the metaverse concept is something that will be provided to them by big tech companies, but that's not the case. And I'm glad it's not the case, because big tech companies have a really bad reputation when it comes to representation. And this was an interesting fact that I picked up in my research for this talk. Interesting because it's from 2021, and I didn't expect there still to be studies on the failings of big tech companies to represent people fairly, or at least with some level of parity online in the platforms that they provide. And I couldn't add certain images to my slides in time, but I actually had a friend from Korea who actually posted Meta's avatars pointing out their failings in representation, and I thought that was very interesting. But I said I was going to speak on it, so this is me doing that. And so what I did in 2021 in December was I started exploring ways to decentralize a metaverse, and the first thing that I wanted to focus on was representation. How can I create an avatar of myself that's the most representative I've ever seen of myself online? And I explored machine learning techniques on human digitization. These are open source, and I took this pretty cool airport photo of myself and used machine learning to turn that into a 3D model. I then used freely available applications to digitize my physical space, and I mapped my living room. And then with a bit of code, I created an environment where I could party in perpetuity together with my best friend. And I was also very intentional about how I constructed the room itself. It looks like it's cut out of something, which I think is an interesting way to show a space in the metaverse, which we assume is some completely endless world where we all participate. And okay, cool. So I've built a metaverse, but it's not decentralized, right? It's my metaverse, essentially. So the question then was, how do we truly decentralize the metaverse? And in collaboration with the Effect Lab and Moo Hybrid Art House, we ran a series of workshops on human digitization, where we invited participants to bring 2D photos of themselves or have their photos taken on site, and using the same pipeline that I used for my experiment, turn themselves into 3D avatars, which they were then able to rig and subsequently animate. I'll play a series of videos so you can see what this was like. So this is the photo capture, and then we also see here participants seeing their images turned into 3D models, and then we have them being able to animate themselves in a 3D environment, and this is all happening within the space of an hour. It was pretty fun for a lot of people to see tiny versions of themselves do pretty crazy things within a short amount of time. So we did that, but then the question then is, how do we connect across realities? Margarita and Marina, I think that's your name, yes, both described the metaverse in pretty open terms, and I think that's important because for me the metaverse is just a different way to connect online. And in choosing to build my metaverse framework in the way that I did, which is one that allows for participation without the need for, you know, devices or the need for specific platforms by big tech companies, what I realized in this exploration was that ultimately what we're trying to do is to connect in the same means that we connect when we're texting or when we're watching an Instagram live or when we're intellectually or I guess mentally immersed in an application. This is just a different format for that. But then it's not enough to just exist on a platform. It's also important that we start to question how we can connect. And in order to facilitate connection on my platform, if you remember a few slides back when I showed you that party in perpetuity, there was a little chat bubble above one of the avatars, and initially I'd built a chat platform. But then what we were planning on doing, this is myself together with the Affect Lab and Moo Hybrid Art House. I get paid 50 cents every time I say that. What we were planning on doing was hosting a dance party. So it wasn't enough to have participants on the dance floor texting or something. And it hit me like a ton of bricks this one afternoon. In 2019, I was speaking at the, I think it was at Fondle CS, about an experiment where I used computer vision to rate a South African dance move and how I turned that into an application for the partial diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Cool, okay, what does that have to do with the metaverse? Well, actually the application that we built had an assessment on it to measure hand tremors, and this assessment used device sensors that are available on any smartphone, which is an accelerometer, to measure movement. And if this video could play, or if someone could just press play for me. Perfect. So this essentially took very minute measurements in a participant's hand in order to calculate the severity of their hand tremors. And I realized that we could use this same movement measuring in the metaverse. And how, you must be wondering. This is actually that. If I could get the slides to work. Next, please. Okay, and next. So during Dutch Design Week 2 weeks ago, we held a metaverse cha-cha-cha dance party. And you see on, I think that's Margarita's ankle. I'm really good at ankles. Margarita attached her phone to her ankle to measure her movement. And what that looked like for participants was that as they danced during the party, you can just as they danced during the party, the movements that we were capturing on their phones were affecting the rhythm of their characters in the metaverse. So they were dancing completely in sync with both their avatars and the avatars of people who were connecting remotely. And it was, honestly, it was the most fun I've had with 2 screens. And what did we learn? I think the most important thing that we learned was that, as you can see from that video, the metaverse is a mirror, but this depends on the degree of realism that you translate to it. And we noticed that by having this giant screen with avatars that were almost life-size, a lot of people just wanted to engage with their avatar in the context of their existence in the metaverse, as opposed to dancing with other people around them, which is very interesting for people who were at a party. And then the other thing that we learned was that participation makes the party. We learned that for a lot of people who were dancing in the metaverse, as it were, they felt an obligation to remain within the space longer than we'd anticipated, because they felt the need to prolong connections that they had made as they danced. And by connections, I'm referring to this pairing algorithm that was built into the party that connected people who were dancing at the same rhythm, be they online and offline, and creating connections through movement rather than, through the more typical digital means of texting and whatnot. And then the third thing that we learned was that hybridity might equal humanity by making the technology disappear as much as we could in the form of the way that we captured dances and translated them to avatars. I think that was a really powerful way in which we were able to bridge, I guess, the space between the real and the virtual. And I think there are more opportunities that we can use less intrusive ways of connecting people in order to build stronger connections on platforms or technologies as divisive potentially as the metaverse. And yeah, this experiment was part of a broader project called the Toolkit for the In-Between. The website is up. You can check the events that are coming up within the scope of the project, and then also read up on the party that we had. And I'll wrap my talk up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Babusi. So we actually have a documentation of the dance party that's like 1 minute long, which we're going to watch just so you can get a sense of what it was like at Moo that night. Thank you, Moo, for that beautiful summary video. And as some of you saw, we also were experimenting with AR that night as well to kind of play around with these different, I guess, interfaces or ways to interact with these digital spaces. I'm going to see if there's a audience question first before I go in with mine. Mm-hmm. Oh. Yeah. Oh yeah, here it is. But we have to read it out loud.
Cool.
It's going to be hard. It says, Babusi, how do you or would you host your metaverse platform? Can you talk about your vision for a truly decentralized metaverse? What principles or technologies do you imagine for that?
Cool. Thank you,
Kiki,
for that. So the metaverse platform is hosted on my website. My vision for it is that in the current state of it, people will be able to create their own parties. So let me actually maybe explain the nuts and bolts of the platform. So we have 3 types of users. The one is a a DJ who gets to play tracks that they upload, and this music is synced across all the users joining virtually on their devices. And then the second type of user is the dancer. The dancer gets to select their avatar if they have one pre-made, or as you saw from the video, they can join using a pre-made avatar that could be either a rabbit or something else.
Grandma.
Yeah. So that's that. And then the third type of user is a viewer. So you can set up a screen and have that in your living room, for example. You could literally host a Metaverse party at home this Friday if you so please. And my vision for it, I think, is, I guess, taking the framework approach. I think it's cool that, you know, I've taken like the time to like build it out, but I think being able to like truly open it up to people to use it for whatever context is where I'm trying to take the platform, in order to ensure that ideas of a metaverse are not you know, monopolized by big tech companies and can be easily decentralized and more localized by the people who will ultimately use these big tech platforms, hopefully not. And what principles and technologies do you imagine for that? The principles I imagine are, I think the most important thing for us is privacy. So throughout the dance experiment, we didn't capture any data, not even data that told us, you know, who was joining offline or online. We didn't have any data around how many participants. So leading from a place where we try to minimize the amount of data we're able to collect as a matter of principle, in order to, you know, I guess push the platform and its purpose forward before putting forward the desires of, I don't know, maybe, you know, research, which I think if we were to be able to collect that information, it would have been beneficial to some degree, but then at the same time, at what cost, especially when you've just created something new. So being intentional about how little data we want to collect was something that I wanted to lead with. And I think going forward as well, it should be something that, given the success of the first event, should really make people question, is it really necessary to collect this data in order to provide an experience that matches why? And then I'll just answer the next question.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's the same thing. Yeah, perfect. Cool.
Great. Thank you. We're running a little bit late, so I'm going to wrap
Cool.
up with you, but then we can, I also had some questions for you, but we can bring those in the discussion after the break.
Yeah, so I can go.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you. So I think a kind of common thread that we've seen in a lot of the talks is that like the current narrative that we have around the metaverse is dominated by largely utopian visions of big tech companies. But then where is like the public counter narrative, the conversations from citizens and from the public? So that's what our next speaker, Wouter Nieuwenhuizen, is going to talk about. Wouter is a researcher at the Rathenau Institute, where he examines the impact of digital technologies on our society. And he's also collaborating with the Digital Society School on what technological citizenship in the metaverse entails and can look like. He's going to be joining us to talk about a manifesto that was published recently by the Rathenau Institute on 10 design requirements for tomorrow's digital society, and about developing methods to engage citizens in the future of the metaverse. Welcome, Wouter.
Thanks. Really great to be here on the day that Mark Zuckerberg just fired 11,000 people working on the metaverse. It's a crazy crazy event. I'm really curious how that will play out. But yeah, the metaverse, how to talk about the unimaginable. I want to try to do this with you today. And first I'll tell a little bit about the Rathenau Institute, because it's kind of a special institute. We are an independent research institution in the Netherlands, advising the Dutch parliament and the Dutch government on issues regarding the impact of digital technologies on our society. We were founded in 1986, and it started actually with a report on the microcomputer and how this may totally change our life, and it did, I think. So that's the reason why we are on planet Earth. And I want to take a little bit of time with you to think about this concept of mixed reality. And for that, I would like to ask you to close your eyes and imagine what kind of digital filter you would like to have in real life. So when you're walking in the street, what kind of digital overlay or filter would you want? Remember that and use it as a conversation starter during the break. Because I think the interesting part of mixed reality is that it can be super exciting, but also kind of scary. And one great example of this is an interview that was done with Mark Zuckerberg last year by a journalist of The Verge. And he asked Mark Zuckerberg a really great question, I think. And it was on the United States Capitol building. So imagine you have different people walking in Washington and seeing the Capitol building of the United States. And they have an augmented reality filter over it. So they have extra information about this building. And one person goes up to this building and he sees, well, this is the heart of the American democracy. This is where it all began, the free state of the US. And another person walks there and he sees a different overlay and it says, this is where the revolution began on January 6th. And this is where we celebrate how, we finally broke off the chains of this building. So I think what is interesting about this example is that with mixed reality, we can actually get more of the issues that we have with the current internet, but then also in the physical space. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, and what we did at the Rato Institute already 5 years ago was publish a series of reports on these kind of immersive technologies, we call them. So speech technology, which is your Google Home, Amazon Alexa, talking to robots all the time, Siri, but also augmented and virtual reality. And the interesting part is that when these reports came out, politicians didn't really care that much. So it was seen as, okay, well, interesting maybe for some time in the future, but yeah, we'll just take it for granted and not do much with it. And this is, I think, an example of how we often deal with these new kind of technologies. And only when the metaverse started to become big, you also saw that in government and in politics, people started to get nervous. Metaverse, what does this have to do with immersive technologies? I want to spend a little bit of time on a definition that we like to use that is, I hope, useful. And the definition is that the metaverse is a vision on the digital environment of the future in which we interact, work, and live. And the key word here is vision. So it is not something yet. It's not one thing. It is not, you can ask many different people and they will give you their opinion on the metaverse, but it's more of a vision as we see it than a reality or a steady concept. But most of the time it consists of several elements. For example, it's an environment where you go in, not on. It's different from the current internet. It's an environment where the digital and the physical meld together. It consists of a virtual economy where you can earn money in different ways. And last but not least, it gives users more control over their data. So it can be, as we heard in the previous talk, it can be a way to have actually more control and be more decentralized. But why should we care about all these developments? I think it's important to state that, well, we should care because what we see on the current internet, we see mechanisms that are already can be kind of scary. So we see disinformation, we see online hate, we see the interconnectedness between people creating a lot of tension. So there are already things on the current internet that aren't always going well, and especially that we haven't really been involved in as a society or as politics because we have left it most of the time to big tech companies. Second of all, we see large investments. So this is why it's important to get into this dialogue now and get to talk about it now. Third of all, we see the risks of immersive technologies. And as a Rato Institute, when we saw that, we said, okay, well, I think we have to have new design requirements for this new digital future. So I want to briefly go over them, but mostly also during the Q&A, I would love to hear your feedback on these because it's meant as a conversation starter more than an endpoint. So what should actually we as a public, require from this new digital world. And the first is we want to remain in control over our digital body. So with these immersive technologies, it becomes really easy to surveil us all the time. Actually, when you use, for example, VR glasses, AR glasses, the data collection and the surveillance, it's part of the way it works. These new glasses, they are developed in a way to track your eye movement, to collect your heart rate, to really use this information. So we want to remain in control. We want to be able to remain anonymous. So this is especially interesting when you talk about augmented reality, walking on the streets. Do you want people with facial recognition glasses to look at you and see who you are, or do you want to remain anonymous as you are kind of now? We want to control over our virtual identity, so we want to be able to express ourselves in the way that we want and not that is decided for us. We want clarity on new digital property issues. So this really comes back to the whole NFT movement and different kinds of ways to own things in the metaverse. Mostly we just want clarity on this. We want to live in an inclusive digital world. Well, we had a great talk about that just now. We want to be able to know when something is fake. I think this is super important. So when we get into more hyper-realistic worlds, of course, it can become more fun, more engaging to be in those worlds, but it's also becoming way harder to distinguish fake from real, especially when we use augmented reality. So this is really important. We want to protect ourselves against manipulation and persuasion. So when the digital overlays of our physical world get so persuasive and real, it can even become hard to know when we are being manipulated or steered into a certain direction. We don't want our health to be harmed. So this is already very evident with social media right now, with people getting addicted to apps, people spending less time with their loved ones in a physical space. So this could even be worse in the metaverse. And lastly, we want to have a digital market with a fair balance of power. So not one company in control of the metaverse, not two, not three, but it should really be in control of all of us. And we want public spaces to remain public. So should it be our right or someone's right to digitally alter how the streets of Amsterdam look like? Or do we want to have those last public spaces really remain public? And this is, I think, important because we need to develop a new kind of technological citizenship, we call this, especially relating to the metaverse. And we can only have this technological citizenship. It's a bit of a complicated term, but when we actually really understand and are in control over the ways that technology influences our life. So the first part is empowerment. We want to use the technology in a way that is meaningful and shape it towards something that's useful in your life. Second is resilience. So we want to be resilient against new technology. We want to know what the risks are. We want to be in control over that. And the third is participation. And this is really lacking at the moment. So companies are just developing what they think will make the most profit for them or will generate the most data. But it's hard for general citizens to participate in this discourse on what is happening right now. Next slide. And how we see this is it's quite black and white, but we think we can have a public dialogue on this metaverse, and then we are in charge, and together we can shape this digital future, or we cannot have this public dialogue, and then it will feel like it will come over us like waves. You know, we're not in control, and our future will be decided for us. And while this was the case with social media, this was the case with a lot of actually internet developments in the past decades, we think this could be the perfect moment to actually shift that around and involve the public way more in this development of these new technologies and develop a sort of counter narrative. So it shouldn't only be, the tech companies that have the beautiful visions of the future presenting for us, but it should be teachers, it should be students, school kids, it should be people in healthcare, it should be all of us actually who decide and think about what would this new digital future look like, so that we can be in charge. Time for action. I would like to invite all of you also to an event we have in a few more weeks, where we engage with the public in a workshop on how we can use augmented reality in a meaningful way, and how we can get more influence over the metaverse. So scan the QR code, join the session, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Wouter. I'm going to keep this one a bit short before the break, but is there a question first from the audience? Yes, over here.
Our first speaker talked about data and sustainability, and you, of course, listed 10 points, and there was not a point on the planet or on sustainability. Is that a conscious choice?
No. So this was really, so this is excellent. It's an excellent point, excellent question. And the funny thing is that when we published this manifesto, it was just before the term metaverse was launched. So it was also more on immersive technologies as a technology in itself, which might not use the same amounts of data, while the metaverse is more this 24/7 encompassing future of always having a digital layer around things. So then it becomes way more important to talk about sustainability. But yeah, great to add number 11 and probably not 10 more. Thanks.
You listed these 10 design requirements, quite short, but of course on the website it goes into more detail. And a lot of the requirements also signal like things that the government actually needs to do. And we were wondering if there are specific strategies, because of course, just like same thing with laws. I mean, you can have a law, but if you don't enforce it, then it doesn't really have a lot of meaning. And same thing with regulations. So I was wondering if also paired with that are strategies for how do you actually get governments to deal with these kinds of questions?
So, great question. So I think what is most important is to get them to understand that if we let this slip, in 10 years we'll have big problems. So getting the urgency across to politicians, to policymakers, and I think this is working now. So I think from the whole political spectrum, most politicians are now realizing that this is the moment where we should really step in and regulate. And also, it's not only about making new regulations, like especially for VR or something. It's also, like you said, about enforcing what is already there. Like we have committed to human rights. We have all these laws on the protection of children. We have them already, but you need to enact them also when it comes to new technologies.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Maybe one question from the audience?
From the chat.
Oh, from the chat. Which one? The top. Which one should we take?
Yeah, you choose. I see a lot of questions in the first one.
These are very complex questions. I'm like, which one should we choose? This is a good one. Can a decentralized metaverse be truly controlled by the public? That principle implies some regulations by government body. How do you see the enforcement of control by the public? And this could come in the form of DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations.
Yeah, a lot of questions.
Well, you can choose one of the ones to focus on if you'd like.
Yeah, maybe the one about DAOs is interesting because what we also see on this debate that's now going on in the metaverse is very technical and actually just hard to understand. Like you talk about DAOs, about NFTs, about brokers, about minting, there's so much technical terms going around. And people in the ecosystem saying like, no, but you just have to, it's a steep learning curve, but you have to learn and engage. And I'm actually kind of critical about that because I think if we really want everyone to be in control and really have a public narrative and control over these metaverse, it should be even easier than the way we now interact with technologies and these kind of DAOs. And as of now, I'm a bit skeptical that it can bring more public control because it's still very niche and nerdy and hard.
Yeah. sometimes quite inaccessible for people.
Yeah, inaccessible, and maybe one more thing, it's also very financial. Most of the time it's like vote with your money or vote with your assets instead of like we decided in the 19th century that's not how to organize a democracy, right? By the amount of wealth you have. So
some places.
Let's not go back to that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Lots of also there's some nice questions there that I think we can bring into the discussion. So you could just hang out here well, you can hang out if you want for a second. Wait, Marco, go to the next clip. Yes. So last month, Meta announced that legs are coming soon in the metaverse. But maybe since they fired like 11,000 people, you never know if it's actually going to happen. So we might get them before everybody else. So as though some of you, we want to play a little, we want to do a little experiment or maybe play a little game, but this event was free to join. That's actually not the case with most of our home events, and we need your support to continue what we're doing. So we'd like to ask you to donate if you can. Marco, can you put the slide up? So go back to the chat slide. So you have to scan the QR code to go to our chat, which should be up in a second. And then through the chat, you can donate. It's going to look like this, and there's the little donate button. And if we get enough donations, then we're also going to get legs and so we'll find out at the end of the night if that's actually going to happen. So in order to wrap up on time, we're going to take just a 5-minute break. So you can go to the bathroom, which is on your left. Or you can hang out here, and we're gonna have some fun, actually quiz questions in the chat that are coming up on the screen. So you can just hang out, go pee, answer our quiz questions, hang out, and then come back here at like 9:20, and then we're gonna start our wonderful discussion. Thank you. Hello. Oh, yes. We're going to start again, everyone. Marine.
I'm good. Yeah. But it was a real bummer.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You can have a seat. You missed the announcement.
Yeah, I was engaged in a very good conversation as well.
You can bring it to the table
Well,
if you want. Great. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So we want to use, I would say, half an hour now to really kind of get into, maybe also go back into some of the questions that were in the chat, but also really engage in a discussion. So I hope some of you thought of questions during the break. But actually, we also collected, with the HUM, we collected a few kind of visuals, like videos or media, to also get the conversation started. So maybe we'll begin to kind of break the ice. So Marco, if you could do the first video clip.
I signed up for Second Life about a year ago. Back then, my life was so great that I literally wanted a second one. In my second life, I was also a paper salesman, and I was also named Dwight. Absolutely everything was the same, except I could fly.
Actually, Chef mentioned this clip when we first started thinking about the metaverse. It's a funny clip, but it touches on a lot of these questions. One is, it's really these questions about representation in the metaverse, anonymity, do you look like yourself or not? When I was reading the New York Times piece from Kashmir Hill, she was saying that in the Horizon worlds, you can't be like a non-human entity. So you can look like maybe not yourself, but you still have to look like a human entity. And then in this case, Dwight is just replicating himself, which actually a lot of sort of things that are close to the metaverse, like digital twins, that's essentially just like a replica of this physical environment. I was just, maybe we can, I don't even know if I have a question. I was wondering maybe we can think about that. I mean, even like with Marina, for example, in relation to data, like you're like Dwight is creating a data version of himself, which does the same thing that he does in his real life.
I have the same question with the architecture, because I'm an architect and I'm like, okay, then you have this new space of experimentation, and why we end up doing things same, like with doors and windows and gravity. And so I will be expecting. So it's a bit very nostalgic in certain ways, like also this, how architecture is portrayed. But as what you say, it replicates or intensifies certain patterns, like certain stereotypes or like, form systems of value that we have here, like what do you wear, how do you sell yourself. So that's interesting. So I guess there is a question of access as well that we are not so open about it. Like, it's a space of desire as well. And perhaps this guy doesn't have such an imagination to imagine him in a different life, performing differently, but flying, which is already quite a lot. So I congratulate him on at least getting that. Yeah.
CO2.
But yeah, I will be more interested in a version in which we really take the possibilities of testing, like becoming other, also the way in which we relate to the world.
Yeah.
It really reminds me of the robot vacuum. I don't know if any of you has a robot vacuum.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, there's a lot of vacuums now that have this LiDAR sensor in it and also a camera, so they can make a perfect 3D map of your house, also with relation to height, etc. So from a perspective of a company, I completely understand why you would want to replicate like your living room, your house, your life, because Amazon wants to know like how is your couch and should you replace it maybe for a new one. And so I think that's maybe we should go against that and be more creative. But from the perspective of the companies, of course you recreate your life because that's generating the data they want.
Yeah, exactly.
With my experiment, the initial version of it, I really needed to recreate my living room because I wanted to connect with my best friend during COVID, and we wanted to party, you know, in a place that had some layer of familiarity. And with this recent party as well, we replicated the move space, but then it really could have been anything, you know. So I guess like familiarity does have its place, and that need to replicate could fulfill some basic human need, but then it could also, you know, have its limitations. And I think to your point, Marina, we're really not applying ourselves if we keep reimagining the already possible.
And I wonder, Babusi, how that links to some of your ideas about representation, because I know that, like, I think you also mentioned this in your presentation, that a part of the work and also what inspired you to do this was also to see yourself, someone that looked like you, represented in the metaverse. So there's also something, I think, really valuable and important about that. Yeah, I wonder how how do you carry those two things maybe together?
Yeah, I think the interesting conversation that's been happening around that human digitization process was, I think it was with Chef that I had the conversation, you know, why are you making these literal, you know, one-for-one iterations of people virtually when it would be possibly more enticing for someone to exist as maybe a dinosaur in the metaverse? And my conversation with that was around how, you know, for a lot of people in the global south, representation is yet a conversation we are going to have where we feel sufficiently satisfied that our needs are being met, where for a lot of people in the global north, it's, you know, it's been done to death to a point where people are tired of being themselves online and they'd love to exist as other. And so it was a come to home moment, I think, in that conversation, because I realized actually, you know, it was actually made for people for whom avatars as they exist currently on so many platforms are still not 100% representative, in as much as they do more for people in the global north. And yeah, I guess in that sense, mine is an effort that kind of feels dated, but then it's catering to a demographic that is coming online for the first time more than other places across the world, and is doing so in an internet that doesn't represent them fully.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience that, yes, go ahead.
We see the guy flying. If you go to Horizon, for example, you even see a desk with a screen, the desktop on it.
Yeah.
And so if people don't know where something is going, they grab back to, like you said, Babusi, to something they know. I have a question for you, Marina. Do you see a role for architects in this whole new world that has to be built in the so-called metaverse?
Yes.
And if so, what would that role be?
I mean, I will be totally lost doing that, but I see the new generations. Many of the students that, for instance, I had in London, they are entering the gaming industry. And yeah, they are imagining new worlds, and they are playing also with notions of time and notions of space that generally, you know, they are trained in the schools of architecture to be quite agile in thinking through them. So it's quite interesting to how they are starting to imagine, other identities, forms of relations and space. The problem is that that's not something that generally you can practice in an architectural office. It's something that probably you practice more in a gaming industry, and so you could see how the people who has this talent go in the direction of working for these big corporations and not perhaps in other sectors that will have other applications that could be eventually interesting, you know. So that's my only worry, and that But I totally see this happening, and I have to say I'm very impressed by some of the proposals they have.
I'm curious about one that I think I've seen so many bad examples that I'm just wondering, because often they just look like, there was one like after the Beeple NFT got sold, then there was like a sort of NFT or metaverse architects that built like this online digital art gallery where they had like people's work in it. And it was such a, I mean, I walked around through it and it was this really lackluster place. And you also see this lack of imagination in some of these. So I'm just wondering what you've seen that's interesting.
Many, but for instance, Kyriakos, one of the students, he's from Cyprus, and he was thinking about the conflict that happens between these different sections in the island, like the Turkish side, the Cypriot side. And he was talking about communities that when there was this separation, weren't able to access certain spaces in one side or the other from the line. And he was able to cross and was able to collect certain stories and objects that carry meaning and histories that were before part of a same territory and were separated. So he created virtual space that also with augmented reality, in which even it was very accessible for even elderly population who had lived through that trauma and was able to bring these stories to life. And it was operating both as an archive of these stories, but also as a place of encounter of communities that were not able to be together. And questions of time were where you were at the same time today, in the future, and in the past. You were here and there. You were at both sides of the line, and it was so beautiful and meaningful for people. It was really moving, like for his own family to be able to inhabit that space. And so I think there are moments in which there is some meaningful understanding of the potential of these spaces as well.
Thank you. Is there any more questions from the audience? Angelique?
If you think of architecture as building, and that it's what a lot happens in games also or in film, but you could also see architecture in the digital realm become something different than the buildings we have nowadays, which is also something that architecture itself is reflecting on, in being more ecological building or different styles, less cornered in a way. Could that also be a way that in which art and design can make a change within this metaverse's thinking in showing different spaces?
I mean, I will try to respond quickly because I don't want to, but I think in a way, yes, that's what I see the potential, that there are like testing grounds for prototyping, imagining. At the same time, if you take this to the extreme, is what Margarita is saying about the digital twin, that you end up using the metaverse as a mirror or as form of experimentation for testing futures and speeding up potential plans. So that has an interest, but at the same time, it's also quite dangerous and is, again, thinking about projecting these possible futures, but at the same time, contributing to the degradation of the present as well. So I think I don't have enough knowledge to say how it could be done in a way that is not so destructive. But there is indeed potential, I would say.
Thank you. I have a question that actually links Babusi and Wouter, which is, it's a question that was earlier linked to your presentation, Babusi. We saw like the avatars that we made for the dance party, and they were a little bit low res, a little bit pixelated, but still you see your presence in it. Actually, that process was really interesting to make an avatar quite quickly that dances, and then you see how much you connect to it. But this question came up, and also Wouter also mentioned it in his presentation about how cautious should we be about uploading these digital versions of our bodies. We made actually a bunch of different avatars of ourselves, but that's also kind of a new realm that we have to think about when it comes to privacy. So maybe like you both can touch on it from your different perspectives.
I'll just jump in real quick. When I built the version of my metaverse that allowed for another participant to be in it, aka my best friend, I had the option of selecting a dance move for him that he would dance through the entire time he was in the metaverse. And I purposely chose a dance that was slightly more extra flamboyant than he would typically dance, because he's a very cool guy. And he was now in my metaverse doing the craziest things, and he would never do that in real life. But I did this on purpose to explore this idea of tension in autonomy or agency in the metaverse. And I asked him 2 weeks after we debuted that version of the metaverse how he felt about being in the metaverse, and he was like, "Yeah, it's so cool, bro." And I was like, "Okay, cool. So how do you then feel about your dance?" And he was like, "Yeah, I mean, it's not really me, you know." And I was like, "Oh, okay. So how did that make you feel?" And then he paused. I think he paused because he realized I did something, and that for me was, unfortunately, he had to be the sacrificial lamb, but a way to explore what that relinquishing of control to another entity means, and what the implications of it are, and to what extent do we consent to what our avatars are doing within this predetermined agreement to participate in the metaverse. And yeah, like right now, I actually realize that I need to write up a manifesto or some guidelines on the principles that govern my metaverse, and the further iterations of it that will be decentralized, because there's a need for people to understand ethically where these bodies stand, myself included, in as much as I'm trying to decentralize the very platforms that I'm now participating in. And yeah, I'll stop with that anecdote and hear from you.
Is a great example, I think. Yeah. What keeps me busy is also this idea of, like, could you even access the metaverse without handing over your data? You know, so when the internet started, you could, you know, be kind of anonymous in it, in a way that there was not much interaction even possible with you and the websites you visit. Now it's also becoming harder, but at least you can, you know, use a physical computer to browse a website, and you can be kind of anonymous. But with the metaverse, it's like if you wear AR or VR glasses, it's in the design of these technologies that they collect data about you, and that they maybe not in the design that the collected data is misused, but the data itself is necessary to function. So that's something, yeah, I think about a lot. And actually, we worked together 2 years ago with an artist that developed an "Don't AR me" filter, and it was an idea about, like, for example, you're in the metro in Amsterdam. What if someone has these AR glasses and looks at you? Like, it's kind of scary. You also have a lot of people using this, for example, for pornography. So using AR to literally project like a naked image on someone. And if that's on the internet, okay, it's creepy. But if it's in real life, sort of, or it's blurring, it gets really scary. So yeah, she developed this idea of having some kind of register or filter that blocks that out. But it's something we have to also talk about, I think.
I'm going to pass it to Lillian to see if there's some interesting questions from people in the chat.
Yes, there are a few, and one is addressed to Wouter. Could you voice some of your opinions on decentralization? I heard a lot of debates in my community on regulation and how it can be bad for emerging technology. For example, if we think about regulation in the Netherlands and consider the community here, many people would be actually fine with it, but in many places, authoritarian governments would want to control the metaverse completely. I guess what I'm really interested in is Wouter's opinion on how the enforcement of direct control from the public would work if the government bodies are too slow to react. For example, after Mark Zuckerberg's testimony to the Congress, there was still not enough action taken, and the action that was too little.
Yeah, so this is something we think about a lot. So of course you have these different institutions working together, and ideally none of them would have all the power, right? In a democracy, we as the public decide about the authority of government and about the authority how we want to rule our lives. So the first step is I think making sure that also through these democratic processes, we as citizens can make politicians aware of these issues. So that's the first step. And the second thing I think is really important. I don't know the name of this person, but that it was mentioned that it works different for democracies and for more authoritarian regimes. And it is especially there that you see this tension. For example, in India now with Twitter, you see that the Indian government is really trying hard to make Twitter adhere to their policies. So decentralization, in theory, it could be a way, but I think more public control, and public doesn't have to mean government. It can mean a publicly funded institutions. Like in the Netherlands, we have publicly funded media. Like they could play a role in it. Schools could play a role in it. It doesn't have to be the government per se. But the risk of decentralization is like, it's few risks. It's a few things, but it's difficult. It's really difficult for people to understand. Like moving from Twitter to Mastodon. I don't know if people in the room experience this. It's kind of hard. So maybe it will get better. Let's hope. But it's still kind of hard. It's a bit confusing. Has more friction. So that is the difficult part. And the other thing is, does true decentralization ever really exist or work? It's a difficult question, because we also have to protect people online, right? We have to protect people from hate speech, from manipulation, from discrimination. And in a truly decentralized model, I'm still not sure how to do that.
Yeah, it's a good
but
comment.
Maybe the audience knows,
We also, we did like an alternative platforms home event where we tried to like jump around from alternative platform to alternative platform. They all broke actually along the way. It was a lot of fun. But I mean, the interesting thing I think also with Mastodon is that you then create communities. You can house them on your own server, and then you also create kind of a code of conduct for your community. So I think there can be something, I mean, I do agree with you. I think it is quite difficult, but there can be something important said about rather this kind of like, we're often like drawn to this totalizing vision. I think that's also why the metaverse like looks so sexy, and we think like we're talking about it, but it is this totalizing vision, and these smaller communities can be a much stronger kind of model where you then decide within your own community, and then you post within that community and you set your own rules. But then people have to also enforce them with one another. And like any community, it can also, there's also a lot of issues that come up as well.
Maybe if I can, I think probably if there is any chance that such a thing like the metaverse in its full version will only work through decentralization, because otherwise will be impossible to feed, the machine with the amount of data that you need to kind of transmit all the time, that the flows of data that we need to run it smoothly and high quality. It's not possible to have a data center, huge data center in Nevada. Probably you have to do it in your neighborhoods. And then that will mean that that's Google or Facebook has those data centers, so those are managed by local communities. So at the end, probably this endless platform is more fragmented. I mean, I'm selling it. I'm not in favor of the metaverse. I think I should have stopped thinking about how to design it. I stopped before.
But then maybe even, Marina, to your point earlier, the idea of the metaverse you are speaking on right now is a specific one, right? Because it could be open to so much more than the version that needs that much data and that much fidelity.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that's the one that we have.
Are there any comments or questions in the audience?
Where are we going?
There, with the blue sweater.
Hi, I had a question for Babusi. I was really interested in what you were saying. And a few weeks back, I was here at another reading about the metaverse. And they were talking that the metaverse was going to give home to specifically neurodivergent people because they would feel more in tune and feel more safe about their well-being and stuff. So I thought that was really interesting, but it made me think about what you're doing as well as giving a place for the Black community, I feel, as well in the metaverse. But in how much you think Black culture and heritage can be like visually and digitally translated into the metaverse, because it has a lot of historical aspects, obviously, and I'm just wondering how you see that translation being done.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the most important angle to view that question from is what is the tactile, what is the real that we then want to translate to the virtual, and then what are the least intrusive means that we could do that. And I think when you do it that way, it's more coming from a human-centered approach that isn't seeking to build the tech which then can be customized to reflect a certain reality or something, but could be more a more human-centric imagining of how we could show certain things, how we can purvey the same feelings that we have on an interpersonal level, the same way that we were able to do with dance, for example. What are the ways that we could translate that in that virtual world, whatever that looks like? And I think so much is possible within the realm of the virtual based on barring the cost of like data and the effects on emissions etc. What you can imagine in the spaces can amplify a lot of cultural notions that to this point have had this major obstacle in terms of the amount of overhead it would take to construct that. But then at the same time, you're kind of playing, I guess, a chicken and egg game in terms of how much to build, which will then possibly ostracize people who don't have access in a continent, Africa specifically, that has the most expensive internet in the world still, yet the fastest growth rate. What is it that, I guess all of it comes down to designing for people. Design for people, design for the limitations of the environments, design for a spectrum of divergence, be it, neural or other, and what does that then mean to build truly inclusive spaces, and then let the tech then help answer those questions as opposed to tech first.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you. We need that as like a manifesto. Right? I saw a question over here.
Thanks. For me, I think the main problem is the naming of the metaverse. I think you should not run behind a company that gives something. It's like, oh, this is our new technology, this is our new hardware, this is our new data harvesting. And in the end, I think the metaverse is already there. It's there in different forms. Through your AirPod, maybe if you go to a theme park, you can go and sit in a ride. There are different types of metaverses already there. And so I find it very limiting in this whole discussion is that the framing of the metaverse comes from a party that you actually don't agree on. And I think we should maybe think more about, okay, if you look, let's say, at sort of the early 20th century when film came along, there were different types of idea what film could be. And I think maybe the discussion should be much more about, like, where can we sort of move forward to without the idea of one company that sort of decides the overall idea of this whole discussion that we had this evening, and that we're trying to sort of divert from. But I think the metaverse in itself is not interesting. It's not an interesting discussion because there are already so many different ways on how we are already sort of engulfing ourselves in media through different ways. So. Like Wouter, I kind of liked your 10th commandment that was there, like the 10th of your 10 commandments. But I think we should be very wary that we have discussions coming from one company. And maybe in the end, it's not so interesting, the metaverse. And also, the 11.
No, I mean,
And do you?
Now you're done. Now you're done.
I think the question, I totally agree with. I totally agree with you. I think the question though is that a company happens that is very powerful and is already many people is already hooked within that. But I totally agree. That's what I was mentioning the carnival, and I agree with you that there are many ways in which we already use this space when you read a book or you watch Netflix or you watch a film, or you engage in many ways of inhabiting parallel realities. The question is that now the metaverse brings those in a consumer product, and we are always, trained very well by the industry to be interested in that, the latest thing. What, as you said, the metaverse is already here. Like is in many experiences that we have when we are having different parallel virtual worlds, understanding virtuality in a wider sense.
Can I maybe respond to that?
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe to satisfy you, the design requirements that we were set up before, so in 2020, so before the metaverse discussion. So, but I think actually it's a good point. But how I see it is that we should use this opportunity of this framing of the metaverse to sort of tame the dragon. So the problems with immersive technologies, they have been there for the past decade. Like we have seen them coming. Experts have been talking about it for a long time, but politicians have not been interested at all because it was a niche technology. Now with this framing of the metaverse, I think it can actually help us gain control over this narrative. So yeah, I think it could also be a chance to talk about this right now.
Thank you. Okay, we're actually running towards the end, so I'm going to wrap up. We can continue, of course, the conversation downstairs in the restaurant and bar. Maybe to wrap up, I wanted to put up this tweet that we were. Yes, can people read it? It's one of those tweets that you start writing really long text and then someone summarizes everything that you are thinking inside of one tweet.
Yeah.
I don't have a question here. I just wanted to share this as as also something that I think actually really encapsulates. Also, I think it links back to Martijn's point as well, kind of following behind these companies. Following, putting the tech first rather than the people, what Babusi was saying. So this tweet will wrap up our evening. And Lillian is checking to see how many people donated and to see if we actually got legs. So you have a final chance to donate if you can. We would greatly appreciate it. We'll give you 1 minute to donate. And Lillian, did we get enough to? As the last thing, okay, then you'll calculate. Okay, you'll give me the signal. Okay, so to wrap up, I just want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you to the audience who are now chatting amongst themselves.
How much to donate?
It's a good conversation. Just big thank you to our speakers who are here with us. Thank you so much for your time and also really sharing your research and your thoughts with us. A big thank you to Pakhuis for hosting us and also jointly hosting the live stream together with us. Yes, of course, thank you to our funders, Stimuleringsfonds, AFK, VSB Fonds, and Innovatielabs for supporting the work and the research that we're doing. If you want to keep up with what we're working on, you can sign up for our newsletter. We also send our editorial newsletter in there. And we also have a Telegram channel where every 2 weeks we share different reading tips, things that we found kind of digging around through the internet. There we go. All that stuff is also on our website if you're not getting the QR codes fast enough. And as Marina mentioned, about the research dossier. So we're publishing our research dossier around this topic of the metaverse, and it's going to be published over a period of 2 months. And the first piece was actually this interview that I did together with Marina. The next piece is actually going to be an interview that Chef did with Babusi. So keep your eye out on our website or sign up for our editorial newsletter to get that in your inbox. And mark your calendars for our next event, which is going to be on November 30th. It's going to be fully online, and we're going to go tour through different kinds of online gaming spaces. So it's going to be similar for some of you who know, like where we jump around from platform to platform. Now we're going to be jumping around together and meeting our speakers in different kinds of gaming spaces. And final thing before we see if we got legs is that, as we mentioned, we are doing research about how these experiences are for you. This is both for people here in the space and people online. So if you could fill out our really short survey, we would really appreciate it. Helps us get a sense of how to shape our events in the future and also get a sense of what people's experiences are like, especially in relation to these kinds of hybrid experiments. And finally, Lillian, did we get legs or not?
Yes, we did get legs.
Let's see. Wait.
On the back, the screen on the back.
Oh!
But you, people in the audience.
Oh, it's in the live stream.
And I think we got feed for the people in the audience.
Yes,
when they leave the room,
we also have feed.
We'll serve you some feed.
We're going to serve you some feed at the end. And I think there's one more slide coming through, which is the Pakhuis de Zwijger one. Yes. You can also support Pakhuis de Zwijger. They make a lot of really amazing programming, and they also need your support. And that's it for tonight. You're going to get to eat some feet, and we have to kind of clear out in the next few minutes, but you're welcome to go downstairs and hang out and ask more questions. And you can always watch this event back actually in our live stream archive website. So you can kind of catch up on everything. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Margarita. This was
Metaverse.